Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Brit.
And this is Maggie.
She has a name.
She has a name. She also is comfortable and has more energy. So unlike last time, I don't know if she's going to zonk out for the whole episode. And it is an episode that is a perfect example of why we need to keep cold cases alive. Why we need to keep revisiting them with fresh eyes. Because when a detective went the extra mile to name a victim who couldn't speak for herself, his work led to a break in a case that seemed impossible to solve for decades. And it led him to another case that could be connected. But police still need more information to solve these once and for all. And so we need you, Crime Junkies, to listen closely and share these details far and wide in case someone out there is sitting on answers. This is the story of the Mulholland Drive murders. It's January 2003, and homicide detective Cliff Shepard is kicking off his year digging through boxes of paperwork in the LAPD's archive unit. Detective Shepard's an almost 3-decade vet of the department, and he's recently been assigned to the cold case unit. So he's reviewing cases from the late 1960s, especially ones with evidence that can be tested with new technology. But the archives are a disaster. I mean, over the years, files have gone missing or haven't been logged correctly. Some case materials haven't been touched in decades. And as he's sorting through it all, trying to make sense of a backlog that's gathered dust, like skimming case summaries, trying to figure out which files are even complete. But when he pulls one box off the shelf and lifts the lid, he sees something that should never, ever be in these boxes. A tan lace bra, stained with blood. Not sealed, not tagged, just like shoved in this box with yellowing case files. And this is not how he should be finding evidence, but like on the other hand,
it's evidence.
It's still evidence, like evidence with blood on it that may still be testable, which is like kind of exactly what he's looking for, right? So he sees the file it's in belongs to the case of someone known only as Jane Doe 59, because she was LA County's 59th Jane Doe found in 1969. Even if the blood just belongs to this victim, like he sees huge potential to be able to use it to give her a name, which might actually kickstart an investigation that, as he goes on to read, didn't make it very far. So what he sees is that on November 16th, 1969, a 15-year-old boy was hiking Mulholland Drive to go birdwatching when he found the woman's body in a ravine tangled up in branches and brush about 15 feet down the hillside. LAPD arrived on the scene by nightfall and determined that the victim was white, about 23 years old, 5'9", and she had been stabbed in the neck over 150 times with what police thought was likely a small knife. Now, to them, it looked like she'd been stabbed while laying on her back, like maybe her killer sat on top of her to subdue her. And she had her head turned to one side because most of her wounds were on the side of her neck. But she fought back, or at least tried to block the blade from coming down on her because she had defensive wounds on her hands. Now, police didn't find the murder weapon at the scene, but they were pretty sure of one thing. This wasn't where she was killed. There were bloody drag marks left on Mulholland Drive, like her killer had parked there, dragged her across the road, and then put her body over the edge of the ravine until it fell down the hillside.
Were there any tire tracks nearby?
None were mentioned in the case file, but you can see faint tire marks in some of the crime scene photos. Problem is, police wouldn't have known how relevant they actually were because this was a busy road. So it could have nothing to do with this.
Okay, if this was a busy road, how did no one see someone dumping a body here?
Well, Mulholland Drive had, or still has probably, some stretches with houses right by the road and then stretches that had just hills and ravines on both sides. So the area where this woman was found was more secluded, still near some houses, but none of them overlooked this specific stretch. So no one would have seen this car stop from their window or anything like that. And it's very possible they dumped her in the overnight hours when traffic and activity in the homes would have been light. There's not an exact time of death, though. All the coroner could tell during her autopsy was that she had been dead 24 to 48 hours, and she had eaten about 2 hours before she died. And there were no signs of sexual assault. Her clothes, a sweater, corduroy jacket, jeans, boots, and that tan lace bra, those were all still intact. And not much else is found at the scene until a few days later when a road worker turned in a pair of prescription glasses found nearby. Now, these were either missed by the investigators who did the initial search, or they were left there after, and so therefore might not even be relevant. But either way, they looked like men's glasses and therefore theoretically could be connected to their killer, definitely not their victims. Now, the CBC reported that work had already been done on this lead back in the day, and all that police really got to was that the prescription was for a very nearsighted man, but the brand was pretty common, so it wasn't something they could actually trace.
Could there be any DNA still on the glasses?
So Detective Shepard told us that the glasses weren't in evidence when he picked up the file. So I don't know if they're lost. I don't know if they were destroyed over time, but there's no trace of them. And so when
there's no trace of them, so there's no trace of DNA to test.
Right.
Did they try to test her bra or anything else at the time?
Well, detective told us that back then, all the bra could have been tested for was blood type,
Right.
but he didn't even know for sure if they did that or not. He also said that no one scraped under her fingernails or anything. So there were definitely missed opportunities for sure. And when no one came forward to claim this woman's body, that's when she became known as Jane Doe 59. They tried IDing her using the clothing that she was found in. They thought that basically what she was wearing was a little heavy for LA, even in November. Plus, some of the clothes were made outside of the US, so they started contacting law enforcement in Canada. They were contacting Interpol, checked with police throughout the US, ran her fingerprints, but nothing came up. And after that, the case just went real cold, real fast. So this is what Detective Shepard starts out with. This isn't the kind of case he usually looks for, like no ID, no suspects, all the evidence is basically gone. And on top of it, Jane Doe 59 was cremated by the coroner's office because her body was never claimed. But there is this bloody bra, which at this point is like a North Star for him. Now, Detective Shepard told us that LAPD was a little behind other departments on when they started testing DNA, but they finally got it going at around 2001 when the cold case unit was formed. So this is 2 years before he picks up the case file. So right away, he submits the bra to the state's missing persons DNA program, but even that was lagging behind. And this is really what he needs because he's looking to ID the victim first and foremost. So results are going to take a while, and Detective Shepard has to put any investigation kind of on the back burner until he has something to investigate.
Right.
But even with 133 cold cases on his plate, this one stays in the back of his mind. And he doesn't know what it is that jogs his memory or why it happens one random day in 2005. But he starts thinking about the book Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi. It was a book that he read back in 1976, very early on in his career. The author was the prosecutor in one of the most infamous murder trials in American history, the Tate LaBianca case, which I'm sure a lot of crime junkies know about.
Yeah.
And Helter Skelter was basically the first definitive account of the Manson family and their crimes. Anyway, for some reason, he feels compelled to pick this book up again. And what do you know? In the epilogue, there is a paragraph about Jane Doe 59. In it, Bugliosi floats his theory that Jane Doe 59's murder might have been linked to the Manson family because of when she died. Her body was found a week and a half after the mysterious death of a Manson follower. By that time, the Manson family was under investigation for multiple murders. So Bugliosi wonders whether she may have witnessed the follower's death and then was killed to keep her from talking about it. Now, Bugliosi is clear that he doesn't have any evidence to back this theory up, but honestly, it's not even all the Manson stuff that catches this detective's attention most. I mean, yes, it's interesting. Yes, it's how he got here. But it's another detail in that paragraph that stands out to Detective Shepard. Bugliosi mentions the name of another young woman, 17-year-old Marina Haba, who was also brutally stabbed to death just 10 months before Jane Doe 59. And her body was found within 2 miles of Jane Doe 59's in a different ravine off Mulholland Drive. And now Detective Shepard is thinking, what if these 2 young women are connected? And if so, are they really connected to the Manson family? Or does he have a different serial killer on his hands? When Detective Shepard looks into Marina's case, he learns that it wasn't investigated by LAPD. It was in a different jurisdiction, so the sheriff's department took it, which may be why neither department made any connections initially, even though Bugliosi eventually did. But because Detective Shepard doesn't have the case file, he starts by reading through old news coverage. He learns that in December of 1968, Marina, a college freshman and aspiring artist, was home for winter break after her first semester at the University of Hawaii. She was staying at her mom's house off Sunset Boulevard, right where West Hollywood borders Beverly Hills. On the night of December 29th, Marina went out with friends to celebrate New Year's a little early, and around 3:30 a.m., her mom finally heard her sports car pull into the driveway. And then seconds later, she heard another car outside, one with loud pipes. It sounded kind of like an older model. It's been reported that she told detectives she looked out her window and she saw Marina's car parked in the driveway with a man standing next to it. And then another car, a black sedan, was also parked in the driveway. Now, I'm sure this all happens fast, but the black sedan starts backing out and the man runs toward it yelling something like "go" before jumping in, and they speed off just as Marina's mom goes outside. But when she's out there, there's no sign of Marina. Even though when her mom checked her car, the keys are still in the ignition. And in an instant, this bad feeling just courses through her mom. And by 3:45, she was on the phone with police reporting her daughter missing. When they arrive at the house, all she could tell them about the man she saw was that he was young, not super helpful. Police do check out Marina's car, and they made note that the glasses her mom said that she needed for driving and likely kept in her car, those were missing. They also noticed that the emergency brake was pulled all the way up, as far as it can go. And I don't know exactly how they got to this from that, but they thought whoever pulled it used more force than Marina could have. They say because she was a smaller girl. And I don't know what this car is, but I can fully pull up my emergency brake. So
I'm thinking of the trucks that I used to drive in high school.
This, I don't know how accurate this is.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't know the cars at the time, or maybe men didn't know women at the time. That's probably that one. Yeah. So even though police were quick to dismiss missing teen girls as runaways at the time, that didn't happen here. They actually took Marina's disappearance seriously right away. And that might have been because Marina's mom told them that they had a close relationship. Marina didn't need to keep secrets from her. And because her mom was an actress and her dad, a writer in Switzerland, was in the industry too, police wondered right off the bat if Marina may have been kidnapped for ransom. So while her mom waited by the phone for a ransom call, police worked on building a timeline of Marina's last known movements, pieced together by questioning the friend she went out with the night before, and her date, a family friend named John, who she had known since she was little. And John told police that Marina came over to his house in Bel Air on Sunday afternoon. Around 8:30 p.m., they got in a limo with this group of friends. One of their dads had arranged it, and they went to a club called Troubadour, which is still in West Hollywood today. The group left at around 11:30 p.m., and the limo dropped Marina and John back off at his house. He says they hang out until 3:15 in the morning, when Marina left to make the 20-minute drive from his house back to hers. So that timeline would put her back at around 3:30 in the morning, exactly when her mom heard her car pull in. And we asked Detective Shepard what he thought about all of that, if he thought Marina drove herself. And he said yes, he didn't think that whoever took Marina would go to the trouble of driving her car back to her house, parking it in the driveway.
Right.
He thinks it's more likely that she made it home and then was just taken as she pulled in.
Okay, and we totally believe John, right? I know anyone theoretically could have followed her, but can anyone confirm that Marina was actually there for those 4 hours where he said she was?
So that's the thing. It seems like John was cooperative with police when they talked to him, but we don't know if anyone backed up his story or if police just kind of took him at his word. I would love to ask John, but we just missed our window. He passed away in 2024.
And what did any of the other friends say? How was Marina that night? Was anything off?
So this is the good news. So we actually did get a hold of someone who was with her that night, in that group. And it's Marina's best friend's boyfriend. And he told us the same thing he told police back then. Everyone had a good time. Everyone seemed to be in a good mood. There was no drama that he noticed. But, and this hasn't been reported as far as we know, he said that there was a rumor going around that night that Marina's boyfriend was married.
John?
So this is the catch. He didn't know the guy's name, but it was whatever guy she was with that night, and that night, her date was introduced to them as her boyfriend. So, like, we think so, I can't prove it.
Yeah, we don't have anything saying definitively yes.
Yeah, and we showed him a photo of John, and he said John's face looked familiar, but all these years later, like, he couldn't be sure if that is the person who was with them that night. Now, he did remember that the man she was with seemed a little older than the rest of the group. Most of them were around 18 to 21. I know John was 23, which, you know, and at that age, it can feel older.
Yeah.
And I had our reporter try and find out whether or not John was married at the time. Turns out John was. He and his wife got married and had a child in 1967. So why was he out on a date with a 17-year-old? And I don't know if his wife was asking the same question, but they got divorced in 1970, a little over a year and a half after Marina's murder. But then they remarried in 72 and then split for good a few years after that. So scandalous if it was him. I say if because, again, we don't have 100% confirmation that John was the one with Marina. And according to the Chicago Tribune, Marina's family said she and John were just friends, and she had a different boyfriend who they didn't name. Then a college friend of Marina's told the Honolulu Star-Advertiser that Marina had decided not to come back to the University of Hawaii after winter break because apparently her boyfriend was going to be discharged from the Army soon, and they planned to get engaged over the holidays, so Marina wanted to transfer to a school in California to be closer to him. Now, John wasn't serving in the Army before the holidays, but he just graduated from college in 1968, so maybe Marina was talking about him, but for whatever reason, like, she, like, fudged some details. Like, it's the only thing I can... If she's talking about him, like, some of the details are wrong, right? Like...
Right. And does the family know who the other guy is and they just, like, weren't saying? Is he real? Could she have made up a fake boyfriend because she was dating this older guy? She knew it'd be a little bit scandalous.
I don't know. Marina's parents have passed away. Friends we reached out to haven't gotten back to us. Like I said, we got that one person who was there that night, and our FOIA request was denied, so we haven't seen the case files. That being said, if anyone out there does know anything about this, or you were there, or friends, or connected to the family, email me, tips@audiocheck. Now, her missing persons case only stayed a missing persons case for 2 days, because on New Year's Day, Marina's body was found. It was actually her purse that was found first at a Mulholland Vista Point. Nothing seemed to be missing. There's still money, credit cards, some kind of ID inside. And then her body was found a few hours later at around 4 p.m., not far away. Police knew it was her right away because she was still wearing the outfit John described to them: brown capris, a white turtleneck, and a fur-trimmed coat. She'd been stabbed at least twice in the neck, had 6 or 7 stab wounds on the front and back of her torso, and there were signs that she had been strangled as well. And she had what looked like a cigarette burn on her skin. And along with 2 black eyes, her body was badly bruised. Now, the coroner couldn't confirm sexual assault at the time, but we spoke with detectives who said that Marina had been sexually assaulted, and it seemed like a sexual assault kit was done. But we are still unclear what happened to that kit based on our reporting. Now, here's the part that really stands out. When Marina was found, rigor mortis was still setting in, and fresh blood found in her lungs and airways hadn't clotted. Blood usually dries and clots pretty quickly, so that, combined with the rigor, meant that she likely died within 8 to 12 hours of being found. So probably between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. on January 1st.
Right.
And very interesting, she had eaten recently, and the food had moved to her small intestine, which happens about 2 to 5 hours after a meal. So that narrowed down her time of death to just a few hours after she ate.
And just as an interesting flag, Jane Doe also ate 2 hours before she had died. Like, almost like someone had had a meal with both of them. Like, they had both eaten a meal with possibly their killer before being killed.
Yes, and it could have been multiple people. Because that's an idea that was entertained because they believe more than one knife was used to kill Marina. The coroner noted some of the stab wounds had 2 sharp edges, other ones had 1 sharp and 1 rounded. Caveat here is, yes, that could mean different types of knives, but it also apparently can also just mean different angles of entry. So could be multiple, could just be one.
But 2 makes sense, like at least to me, knowing that Marina's mom saw like a guy by the car and then another guy who yelled go.
Right.
Clearly to another person that he was with.
Driving probably,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, but the question still is who and why? It didn't seem like a ransom plot to police anymore, though. I mean, they never got any demands before finding her, but they quickly find a new angle to explore. They said there had been multiple sexual assault attempts in Marina's neighborhood before she went missing, and they started to consider whether her kidnapping might have been connected to those. So they put word out about this, even questioned at least one guy that they suspected in another abduction, but nothing ever stuck to him relating to Marina. In August 1969, they investigated the Michigan co-ed killer, John Collins, because he'd allegedly killed girls from Northern California earlier that year. But John didn't even arrive in California until June of 1969, which is months after Marina's murder, so he gets ruled out. Then came the Manson murders later that August. Then Jane Doe 59 was found dead that November. And in December, state officials sent LAPD a list of unsolved cases that might match the Manson family MO, particularly violent stabbing deaths, and that list included Marina's and Jane Doe 59's. Initially, they thought maybe Marina was stabbed with the same knife used in the Tate murders by the Manson family, but that couldn't be proven. And then there was nothing else physically connecting the cases. So even though more was able to happen in Marina's case than in Jane Doe 59's, they both ended up in the same spot by 2005. Cold as ice. Until Detective Shepard gets that bee in his bonnet and rereads Helter Skelter. But he has the benefit of hindsight, so he knows investigators in 1969 were eager to tie almost every unsolved stabbing murder to the Manson family at the time, and he's taking Bugliosi's theory with a grain of salt. Like, to him, yeah, okay, the Manson angle is possible, but without proof of that, anything is really possible.
So, Manson stuff aside, does he think that the 2 are connected for sure, though?
He thinks there are a lot of similarities worth looking into. And he wants to see if Marina's sexual assault kit still exists so he can run DNA tests. Because if Marina and Jane Doe 59 were killed by the same person, the answer to both cases might lie in one piece of evidence. So soon after, he contacts the sheriff's department about Marina's case, but he can't get much out of them. No one there seems to be actively working her case or even knows much about it. And it's not like he can go over there. Like, he has no jurisdiction there. He can't go banging down doors. So he just ends up not being able to get answers on her case or answers as to where that kit is or if it still exists.
Right. It could just be stuffed in a box somewhere.
Like the bra he found. Exactly. And he ends up hitting another wall even in his own case because the DNA that he does have isn't the slam dunk he was hoping for. In May 2006, so this is 3 years after he submitted that bloody bra for testing, Detective Shepard gets word that the lab was able to recover a female DNA profile. But the only national database they can put it into right now is CODIS, which isn't showing any matches. So this is great if you can ever find a family member to compare it to. But until then, she's gonna still be Jane Doe 59. So Detective Shepard has no choice at the time but to shift focus and tackle other cases with more promising leads. Over the next few years, his work helps bring down serial killers like, I don't know if you've heard of him, Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, Lonnie Franklin, and Chester Turner. In early 2012, he is set to retire, but still, in the months before he does, he just wants to see Jane Doe's case solved. So he reaches out to media outlets while he's wrapping things up, hoping someone's gonna run her story, and someone out there will see it, someone out there is looking for her, but almost everyone he turns to turns him down, telling him to call back when he has a suspect and a better story.
But he won't have a suspect until he gets an ID, which he can't get without press, which you aren't giving him.
Exactly. One person hears him, though. Michelle McNamara.
Michelle. So for those of you who don't know, she was an incredible true crime journalist who wrote infamous book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. It's incredible. Highly recommend.
Yeah, she's pretty big in the true crime space, right? And she is kind of like us, right? She's doing her blog. You're not tied down by like these big organizations above you, like telling you what you have to get.
She can kind of pick and choose what she's going to cover.
And she's like, I'll absolutely take this on. But unfortunately, right then, that's not what moves the needle.
Mm-hmm.
So no one comes forward with new information by February 2012 when Detective Shepard retires after 37 years with LAPD. He hands the case off to another detective, Luis Rivera, and hopes that someone someday will bring Jane Doe 59's name to light. But his work wasn't for nothing, because in 2015, Detective Rivera gets a call from the coroner's office. They've just heard from a woman in Canada who thinks Jane Doe 59 may be her sister, Reet. And guess how she made the connection? Michelle's blog. She ends up telling Detective Rivera that she learned about the case from a friend. She came across the blog post, which had a picture of Jane Doe 59's face taken during her autopsy, and she thought the woman in the picture looked like this woman, Reet Jurvetson. She was only 19 when she left Toronto for LA in late 1969. Her friends and family lost contact with her after that, and no one had seen or heard from her since. So Detective Rivera asked for photos of Reet, descriptions of her jewelry, anything that he can compare. I mean, DNA is going to be like the ultimate judge. But before they can even get to talking about that, the description this woman gives of her sister's jewelry seals the deal for him. She says her dad had 2 rings made from an old pair of cufflinks, one for each of his daughters. And a ring found on his Jane Doe matches the one Reet's sister has. So after all these years, they finally know who she is. Jane Doe 59 is Reet Jurvetson, and DNA ends up confirming it.
I can't imagine that, like, what it must be like to find out that your sister, who you thought was just gone. Like, lived her life, like, was actually murdered.
And not being able to claim her body is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And because so much evidence was destroyed, even though Detective Rivera knows who Reet is, he has to start his investigation from scratch to figure out who would want her dead. So Detective Rivera travels to Montreal to interview Reet's family and friends. He learns that Reet was the youngest daughter of prominent Estonian refugees. Her mom's uncle was actually the last president of Estonia before the Soviets took power. And Reet was the free spirit of the family. She spoke 3 languages, loved to make art, and she even sewed her own clothes. And after she graduated from high school, she moved in with her grandmother in Toronto and got a job at a post office. But before she left Montreal, she met a guy there in a cafe named Jean, or John.
John, like Marina's friend John? I realize it's a common name, but like...
Even though it is a wild coincidence, police say it is just a coincidence.
Okay.
Now, this Jean, I'm going to call him Jean as opposed to John, this Jean might have had a French accent. So he was probably French-Canadian, and he had like long feathered like 60s rocker hair, whereas Marina's John was clean cut. So anyways, it seems like Reet fell hard for this guy. Sometime around September of 1969, she followed him to LA, likely by bus, where he was thought to be staying with another friend of his, also named, wait for it, Jean or John, also from Montreal.
Oh my God.
I'm going to call him roommate John. And then I'll call the other guy boyfriend John.
And then there's also John with Marina.
Marina's John.
Got it.
You got it. So on October 31st, 1969, this is Halloween, Reet sent a final postcard to her family from LA. And she wrote that she was happy, she was going to the beach a lot, and the people were super nice. But this was the last anyone ever heard from her. Years later, a friend of Reet's ran into roommate Jean back in Montreal, long before Reet was ever identified, and asked him about her. And roommate Jean said, yeah, she stayed with us for a couple of weeks. Everything was good, but then she just left. Now, Reet did plan to visit her brother in Arizona. LA was always supposed to be just like a pit stop. But we know she never made it to Arizona. So her friend asked roommate Jean if he had any idea where Reet could have gone, but he's like, no, all I know is that she left. At the time, Reet's friend didn't speak French well, and roommate Jean didn't speak English well. So it is also possible something was lost in translation, or maybe he knew more, but she didn't know how to get it out of him. I don't know.
Okay, but if she disappeared in LA and her brother was, I assume, expecting her in Arizona, why didn't anyone report her missing? Or, wouldn't be the first time, did they, and the police missed it?
Her family never filed the missing persons report. Detective Rivera told us that because Reet was so independent and her family, we found out, was like very religious and strict, everyone kind of just assumed she'd chosen to cut ties and just start over in LA. And they did actually send a friend living down there to check on her at the address written on the postcard. But when the friend rang the buzzer, a caretaker answered and told her that Reet moved out a while ago, didn't leave a forwarding address. So this friend never went inside and knocked on Reet's door or anything. And at one point, it's not like her family wasn't looking for her. Like, they even hired a PI to find her, but nothing came of it. And they said that the sketches police circulated of Jane Doe 59 didn't look anything like Reet, so they wouldn't have recognized her through those. And by the way, Reet's family was okay with us covering her story, but they wanted privacy and they didn't want to speak for it. But in an in memoriam, her sister said they always believed Reet would reconnect with them someday. Like, they never imagined, even in all their searching, that she was actually dead. And the CBC found a note written by Reet's mom asking anyone with information about her daughter to call her collect. So all those years, they never stopped looking for answers, even before her mom died. And in 2006, Detective Rivera was fully ready to pick up that baton that she had been carrying before her death. And he starts with the address on the postcard Reet sent, hoping somebody like a neighbor could give him information about Reet's last days and about these Jean guys. But the apartment building, which in '69 stood right next to Paramount Studios, it had been demolished by then. Now, he does eventually find a former owner, but they don't have any records from the time.
And we're sure that roommate John isn't Marina's John, or that Marina's boyfriend isn't French John. There's so many Johns, and it feels so unlikely.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about boyfriend John was very different. The roommate John didn't match Marina's John either.
Okay.
So just as a quick description, boyfriend John, he's taller. He's over 5'9", has long dark hair, dark eyes. Roommate John, shorter, around 5'6". He had short black hair, blue eyes. Marina's John didn't look like either of those guys.
Okay.
At least not in the black and white photos I've seen. It seems like he had short, lighter hair, light eyes. Even though, interesting fact, her John, Marina's John, did spend time in Europe growing up. I don't know if he ever lived in France specifically. And it seemed like he moved out of California pretty soon after Marina's murder, probably before Reet even got there, and then never lived anywhere near her apartment or had any ties to Canada as far as we know.
Okay, so why haven't either of the Jean guys come forward if they have nothing to hide?
Exactly.
And they'd be in their 70s now?
Yeah.
I mean, they or someone who knew them
should still be out there.
Yeah, have to still be out there.
So yeah, that's how Detective Rivera feels. The problem is nobody seems to remember these guys' last names after all these years. And tracking down two guys named Jean from Montreal who were in LA in '69 feels like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
But Canadian media outlets do manage to track down a painter who said that he remembered boyfriend Jean. Back then, this painter was a waiter in Montreal and saw him with Reet a few times. And he thinks boyfriend Jean was maybe a medical student. Maybe his name was Pierre, but still no last name. So this painter and a friend of Reet's eventually sit down with a forensic artist to create sketches of both of these Jeans, which LAPD releases to the public. But even having sketches, those haven't led anywhere. We're going to put them in the show notes in case anyone recognizes these guys all these years later. But who are they?
So I won't bring up the Johns again, but is there even a solid connection between these two cases?
Detective Rivera doesn't really get to dive into Marina's case right away, right? That didn't happen for him because we know they didn't have the files, they didn't have anything. It doesn't happen for him till 2016. This time, even though there's still no one actively working the case, the sheriffs do pull those case files that Detective Shepard couldn't get access to. And he told us that after kind of looking at everything, his gut feeling is that these are actually separate cases. He's not closing the door on a connection between Marina's case and Reet's case. There's always a chance they were killed by the same person. But with everything he knows, it feels unlikely to him.
And maybe trying to connect these cases to the Manson family and then each other led to blind spots for police over the years.
Right.
So if we look at them separately, what are each of their individual theories for each case? If they aren't connected and they are standalone, what does that even look like?
So in Marina's case, we're for sure side-eyeing John.
Okay.
Right? But there are other roads to go down. Detective Shepard told us Marina's dad apparently had ties to the OSS, like the early version of the CIA during World War II. And Detective Shepard said that he'd heard rumors or theories that the dad's work might have somehow led to her murder.
What was his work?
So I asked our reporter, Malika Dhaliwal, to find out. It turns out he was training U.S. soldiers in psychological warfare.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was a journalist, and his main job was to make and distribute Allied propaganda to demoralize Germans. But he also interrogated German POWs, in one case for 3 days straight. So he probably made some dangerous enemies along the way. And I would love to go all the way down this rabbit hole.
I mean, you see my face.
But
Me
this
too.
This is all we know. Though, like, again, props to Malika, because you can't even just Google this stuff. Like, the CIA started to declassify OSS records in the 80s, and now they're stored in the National Archives, like in person.
Oh, so you have to like be there to access them.
Right, which like we are not located there, and we didn't have time to go for the reporting. So she got creative. I guess some antique dealers sell World War II letters, and she found an online antique store selling a letter Marina's dad wrote to his superiors detailing some of his post-war work, which is like wild.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. All of that said, according to Detective Shepard, it is probably unrelated. Because to him, and I understand what he's saying, to him, Marina's murder seems more like a random act of violence, possibly sexually motivated, rather than like a targeted attack.
To like get to someone else.
Yes. Now, Marina's stepbrother actually mentioned one possible suspect that fits in a 1988 LA Magazine piece. He claimed that a detective believed Marina might have been killed by a biker and a drug dealer named Spanky. Because, interesting fact, police actually, when they found her body, they found an old motorcycle frame at the crime scene, and they actually took the whole thing into evidence.
And could they tie this guy to that motorcycle frame?
I don't know. Marina's brother didn't say why the detective suspected him. Like, in my mind, that's like, oh, I heard motorcycle gang and I know there's that piece there. Like, I'm tying that together, but no one ever really does. Now, we were able to identify Spanky as a man named Kirk Smith, who has a criminal record a mile long. He would have been about 18 in '69 when Marina was murdered. And the first charge we found on his record was from just a year later, in 1970, when he was arrested for narcotics possession after an LAPD raid. In 1976, this guy escaped prison while serving a 10-year sentence. Don't know what for. And then he went on to rob 17 banks before being caught and charged with armed robbery. By 1980, he'd escaped again. And while he was in jail awaiting trial for the attempted murder of other inmates in 1981, he became a suspect in a beating, murder, and a stabbing. But wait, there's more. While in prison, he joined the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1987, he got involved in their conspiracy to murder correctional officers as revenge for the shooting of another member. Now, we don't know if those were all the charges he faced. We submitted a FOIA request for his full file, but we haven't received that yet. And then he died in 1998, so we can't go and try and talk to him.
One of the most frustrating things kind of across the board that I've felt while you've been telling me about this is like how we can't get access to anything, but also I feel like we wouldn't need to spiral as much if someone could just get their hands on her sexual assault kit.
Which we might. So from what Detective Rivera remembers, like there is physical evidence in her case that hasn't been tested yet. Now, is that the sexual assault kit? Is it something else? I don't know. And I don't know what, if anything, has been done, will be done, or could be done. And the question is, do they still have it? Because I do know that at some point there was a pipe burst at the evidence facility. And so it's possible that the reason we haven't seen or heard anything about this is that there's been water damage. Like, we haven't confirmed that with the sheriff's department because it seems like somehow there still isn't anyone working Marina's case. So like, that's bad news, but also good news because maybe it is just sitting there and nobody's gone looking for it. But like, we're running out of time. And like, if someone in the sheriff's office is hearing this, like even just going down and knowing that that was there, that this could be solved, like, I beg of you to take 20 minutes. Now, we know most of the evidence in Reed's case is long gone. Detective Rivera told us that the bloodstained bra has been tested to death and only Reed's DNA profile has been pulled from it. And he said that Reed's murder, going back to are they connected? He just said Reed's felt different. It was so personal and so full of rage. You have to be angry to stab someone 150 times. Mm-hmm. And that's usually the kind of violence Detective Rivera sees when the attacker is an intimate partner. Now, both detectives believe the key to solving Reed's case lies in finding those two Jeans, especially the one that she followed to LA. But maybe like Michelle McNamara's blog, one day this episode will find the right person who remembers Jean. Now, by this point, Detective Rivera has retired too, but he still works Reed's case as a reserve officer on a part-time basis. All of Marina's family and most of Reed's immediate family who knew her are gone now. So Detective Rivera is relying on the public, you guys, to come forward with tips. So talk to your parents and grandparents, share this episode, especially if they lived in LA or Canada at the time. And, to jog people's memories, contact police if you knew Marina, if you have information about her boyfriends or anyone who drove a black sedan, if you were with her that night at the Troubadour or saw a black sedan in that area. Contact them if you were on a bus with Reed from Toronto to LA in the late summer or fall of 1969, or if you worked with Reed at the post office in Toronto and saw her with John. If you, this is a little broad, but knew any French-Canadian men named Jean or Pierre who lived in LA in 69, or if you lived at the Hollywood Executive Apartments on Melrose Avenue near Paramount Studios in late 1969. And then there's the option of did you go to medical school in Montreal or Toronto in the late 60s and knew somebody who you went to school with who moved to LA soon after graduation? I know that's a lot, but I'm trying to add little nuggets to kind of just jog your memory. But if you have any tips about either of these cases, I'm going to put the contact information for both jurisdictions in the show notes. Remember, they're held by a sheriff's office and LAPD. So please call if you have any information. You can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkiepodcast.com. And if you want to listen to more episodes like this and all of our episodes completely ad-free, be sure to join our fan club. We'll put a link in the show notes. You'll also get early access to new episodes every week.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
We'll be back next week with a brand new episode.
Deeper her delusion grew. It became her absolute daily mission to destroy Shirley. It culminated in an unprovoked attack at a restaurant. Marlene charged across the parking lot like a wild animal and assaulted Shirley. And what did Shirley do? Shirley, being the kind and gentle soul she was, decided not to press criminal charges. She did not want to cause trouble for her boss, Irvin. That act of grace cost Shirley her life. Kindness is a virtue, but in the face of a predator, it is a fatal weakness. The night of the murder, Shirley went home and got ready for bed. Marlene slipped inside. The attack was swift and it was devastating. Marlene tried to cover her tracks with bleach, but she made mistakes. Murderers always make mistakes. When we found Marlene sitting in her vehicle at her attorney's office, she was wearing sunglasses and pretending to be bored. She acted like she was completely untouchable, but we looked at her hands. The tips of her manicured nails were broken. She had fresh cuts on her fingers. She tried to offer an alibi through a friend named Tim Connor. Tim was a motivational speaker. He told us Marlene was with him. But when we found a kitchen knife missing from his home that perfectly matched a murder weapon, Tim crumbled. He admitted Marlene had begged him to lie. The North Carolina State Crime Laboratory eventually found Marlene's deoxyribonucleic acid on the shower curtain in Shirley's bathroom. The arrogant, wealthy woman who thought she could hunt another human being for sport was finally brought down. During her trial, she gasped and collapsed when the guilty verdict was read. She will spend the rest of her life in prison, but that does not bring back Shirley Pierce. Shirley died terrified, completely confused as to why this woman harbored such absolute hatred for her. It is a tragedy born of a phantom obsession, but obsession takes many forms. Sometimes it is not driven by imaginary jealousy. Sometimes it is driven by an inescapable, suffocating reality. Let us travel down to St. Petersburg, Florida. The sun shines, the retirees relax, and the water is beautiful. But inside a repossessed mobile home on Yellow Pine Drive, a completely different story was unfolding. A cleaning crew had been sent to clear out the abandoned property. The house had been empty for months. When the crew walked in, they were hit by an odor that you never forget once you smell it. It is a scent of human decay. The trailer was filled with dozens of air fresheners. They were plugged into the walls, sitting on counters, hanging from the ceiling. Someone had tried desperately to mask the smell of death. In the back bedroom, wrapped tightly in sheets, towels, and plastic, the crew found a mummified human body. The medical examiner discovered a single gunshot wound to forehead. Through extensive testing, the body was identified as 40-year-old Deborah Burns. To understand how Deborah ended up rotting under a pile of blankets, you have to understand the tragic life of her sister, Barbara Burns. Barbara was born in 1951. When she was just 15 years old, her life effectively ended. Her sister Deborah had contracted scarlet fever and suffered severe brain damage. Deborah never mentally matured past the age of 6. When their father died and their mother became ill, Barbara became the sole provider and caretaker for Deborah. Imagine being a teenager and having the entire weight of a disabled sibling drop onto your shoulders. For 40 years, Barbara worked minimum wage jobs. She had no romantic relationships. She had no social life. She lived entirely to serve Deborah. Deborah was not an easy person to care for. She was demanding, disrespectful, and physically abusive to Barbara. Barbara endured it all because that was her duty. Then a miracle happened, or so they thought. Their brother passed away and left them an inheritance of $350,000. For the first time in her life, Barbara could breathe. They bought the mobile home. They traveled to California and Australia. But Deborah had the impulse control of a toddler. She demanded online shopping sprees, buying endless toys, pinball machines, and expensive gifts for men she met on the internet who were just using her. Because Barbara had spent her entire life giving Deborah whatever she wanted to avoid a tantrum, she could not say no. In just 3 years, every single penny of that inheritance was gone. The bank was foreclosing on the home. They were completely destitute again. Barbara realized she would have to go back to scrubbing floors and working retail just to survive. The financial stress, combined with 4 decades of emotional exhaustion, pushed Barbara to the absolute brink. On the 14th of August, Deborah threw a massive fit over their lack of money. They fought terribly. When Deborah finally went to sleep, Barbara sat in the living room. She listened to her sister snore. She realized that when the sun came up, the screaming would start all over again. The cycle of misery would never end. Barbara walked into the bedroom, took a handgun she had purchased for protection, and used it against her sister. She later told detectives she did not even know what she was thinking. She just snapped. But what happened next shows the deep psychological denial of a fractured mind. Barbara wrapped the body in plastic. She bought every air freshener she could find. She lived in that house with her sister's decaying corpse for 6 weeks. She acted as if nothing had happened. Eventually, she boarded a bus and fled to Virginia Beach, returning to the only place where she had ever experienced happiness as a child. When detectives found her working at a convenience store, she initially lied, but the guilt was eating her alive. She broke down and confessed. Barbara pled guilty to manslaughter and served 12 years in prison. I look at Barbara Burns, and I feel a profound sense of pity. She was a good person who was pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. Circumstances created a breaking point, but murder is murder. You do not have the right to take a life, no matter how tired you are. 2 different women. 2 completely different motives. Marlene Johnson killed out of pure narcissistic entitlement and a fabricated delusion. Barbara Burns killed out of absolute despair and emotional collapse. Both left victims in their wake. Both destroyed their own lives. It just goes to show you that the darkest corners of the universe are not found in outer space. They are found right inside the human skull. My, it is a sobering thought. And it is the reality I have lived with every single day of my career. Humans are peculiar creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can possibly imagine, and they always think they are smarter than everyone else in the room. I tell you, in my years of looking into the dark abyss of the human soul, the monsters do not hide under your bed. They live in the spare bedroom of your apartment. Let us look at a young woman named Pamela Pitts, just 19 years of age, a beautiful, vibrant girl with a smile that could light up a room, a girl who loved her family and wanted nothing more than to find her place in this chaotic world. She was artistic. She was a mentor to her younger siblings, a pure soul who possessed the exact kind of warmth that draws in cold, empty entities. Enter her roommate, Shelley Norgard. There's a certain type of predator that does not stalk from the shadows. They sit across from you at the dinner table. They mirror your emotions. They mimic your smile. But behind their eyes, there is nothing but a vast, calculating emptiness. Shelley was an 18-year-old walking tragedy of abandonment issues and pathological manipulation. A girl with a strict father and a broken home. She did not just want friends. She wanted hostages. Shelley clung to Pam, treating her not as a roommate, but as a possession. So when Pam realized she was drowning in the financial irresponsibility and endless lies of her roommate, she decided to move out. A normal person says goodbye. Shelley decided that if she could not have Pam, no one could. On the 16th of September, 1988, Pamela vanished. 13 days later, a target shooter at a local recreational area known as Gordo's Pit made a grim discovery. A body, subjected to the ultimate indignity, concealed by fire to destroy evidence. The brutality was a cowardly attempt to hide a sudden, vicious outburst of rage. My. You have to be kidding me if you think fire destroys everything. It does not destroy the truth. It merely delays it. The local rumors started immediately. Whispers of satanic cults and ritualistic sacrifices. People watch too many movies. The reality of murder is rarely mystical. It is almost always petty, pathetic, and born of entirely human greed or anger. Detectives looked at Shelley, who gave a flimsy alibi about driving around aimlessly for hours. An alibi her own boyfriend, Ray Clerks, refused to fully support. Friends reported Shelley had been marching around that night, furious, blaming Pam for everything wrong in her pathetic life, and even boasting in the past about how to make a body disappear using fire or mine shafts. But knowing it and proving it in court are two entirely different animals. And without physical evidence, the case grew cold. Years passed, and the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. A detective does not believe in coincidences. On the 25th of May, 1991, college students exploring a vertical mine shaft stumbled upon a horrific secret. Wrapped in a waterbed liner was the decomposing body of 24-year-old Ray Clerks, the former boyfriend of Shelley, who had also tried to leave her to move to California. He was shot in the head. A fingerprint belonging to Shelley was found on a flashlight discarded in that very mine shaft, and her car practically radiated the smell of a deceased human being, complete with the blood of Ray in the trunk. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 1993 and was sent away for 20 years. But what about Pamela? Justice for Pam had to wait in the shadows for nearly 3 decades. In 2011, a cold case detective began pulling at the threads again. Shelley was released, married, living a new life as if the ghosts of her past were buried forever. But detectives are patient hunters. They listened to 97 recorded prison phone calls. In one call between Shelley and her father, he expressed his lifelong doubt, stating she had never actually told him what happened to Pamela. The silence on the other end of that line was deafening. That silence was the sound of guilt. In 2017, investigators finally placed Shelley under arrest for the murder of her best friend. Faced with trial in 2021, The coward took a plea deal, claiming she merely confronted Pam at a party. A fight ensued, and she just could not stop hitting her. She refused to speak of the horrific aftermath. She was given credit for time served and walked free. You look at a result like that, and it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. The justice system is a mechanism of men, and it is inherently flawed, but we found the answer. We unmasked the monster. Pamela Pitts and Ray Clerks were beautiful people whose lives were extinguished by a parasite who mistook control for love. I tell you, the tragedy of this job is that we can only speak for the dead. We cannot bring them back, but as long as we expose the hollow, pathetic nature of the killers who took them, their memories will forever outshine the darkness. Humans are curious creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can possibly imagine. You spend enough time looking at dead bodies, you start to realize that the monsters do not hide under the bed. They sit across from you at the Thanksgiving table. They smile, they ask you to pass the salt, and they calculate exactly what your life is worth to them. When you strip away the tears, the elaborate lies, and the dramatic phone calls to the police, you usually find a motive as old as time. Greed. Pure, unadulterated greed. I tell you, when blood betrays blood for a few dollars, it makes you question the very fabric of humanity. Welcome to LaGrange, Georgia. February 4th, 1991. A picturesque little town where everybody knows everybody, and nobody expects the devil to knock on the front door. Our victim is Margaret Abernathy, 66 years old, by all accounts, a saint. She and her late husband built a local empire, car dealerships, real estate, rental properties. But Margaret was not just wealthy, she was generous. She loved her children. She funded their dreams, backed their business ventures, and gave them everything a mother could give. That was her greatest mistake. She loved them too much, and she blinded herself to the reality of who she was raising. It starts with a frantic call to emergency dispatch around 12:30 in the afternoon. The caller is Priscilla Matula, Margaret's 41-year-old daughter. She says there has been a burglary, and her mother is hurt. First responders arrive. Margaret is on the bathroom floor. She is not conscious, but she is breathing, agonal breathing. The sound a human body makes when it is fighting a losing battle against death. At the hospital, the emergency room, doctors find the truth. She was not just hurt in a scuffle. She was shot 2 times in the head with a small caliber weapon. 1 bullet hit the brainstem. They put her on life support, but the damage is done. The matriarch of LaGrange is gone, and we have a homicide. You walk into a scene like this, and the first thing you do is listen to what the room is telling you. The family says it is a home invasion, a burglary gone wrong. My, you have to be kidding me. I look at the back door. There's a broken pane of glass, but the hole is too small for a human hand to reach through and unlock the door. And most of the glass is on the outside, which means it was broken from the inside. Then I look at the bedroom. Drawers are pulled open, and items are set neatly on the floor. Burglars do not care about your hardwood floors. They're like tornadoes. They rip, they tear, they grab, and they run. They do not neatly arrange your belongings. And what is missing? A mink coat, some jewelry, and a Derringer pistol. But the television is there. The expensive electronics are untouched. This is not a burglary. This is a stage play, directed by an amateur. So we look at the victim. Margaret was shot twice. But look at the blood evidence. There is blood on the pillow in her bed. There is bloody toilet tissue in the bathroom. This tells a terrifying story. The shooter came in while she was resting and shot her once. A small caliber bullet that did not penetrate the skull deeply enough to kill her instantly. The shooter left, thinking the job was done. Margaret woke up, bleeding, terrified, and stumbled to the bathroom to clean herself up. Imagine the sheer terror of that moment. A mother, realizing someone had just tried to end her life in her own sanctuary. And then the killer comes back. They realize she is not dead, so they walk right up to her in that bathroom and put a second bullet into her brain stem. That is not a random crime. That is an execution. That is personal. In a stage scene, you look at the people closest to flame. We start with Diaka, a gentle giant who lived with Margaret to help care for her ailing husband before he passed. Diaka disappears from work the day of the murder. Highly suspicious. But we find him. He was sneaking off to a job interview at another car dealership because he did not want his boss to. No, his alibi is rock solid. We tell him Margaret is dead, and the man breaks down. Real tears. He loved her. Diaka is out. Next, we hear whispers from Nick Matula, Priscilla's husband. Nick points a finger at Alec, Margaret's son. Nick says Alec had money problems and was just waiting for his parents to die to collect a $40,000 life insurance payout. Interesting. A family member eager to point the finger at another family member. But Alec has a bulletproof alibi. He was at work all day, verified by multiple people. Alec is out. Now, let's turn our attention to the daughter who found the body, Priscilla Matula, the one who called in the fake burglary, the one whose husband was so quick to throw her brother under the bus. Priscilla is the office manager at a car dealership that she and Nick bought with Margaret's money. Margaret put up her house and a certificate of deposit as collateral to the tune of $130,000. We start digging into Priscilla's life, and we find a mountain of lies. Priscilla gave investigators an incredibly detailed timeline of her morning. She said she went to work, went to the bank, went to the post office. The lines were too long. She drove around the block. When a suspect gives you that much detail about a mundane Tuesday, they are trying to sell you a script. We talked to a convenience store clerk. Priscilla was there at 7 in the morning, nowhere near where she claimed to be. We talked to a woman looking at a rental house right across the street from Margaret's home. She saw Priscilla's vehicle parked in Margaret's driveway between 10 and 10:30 in the morning. And while she was there, she heard a gunshot. Priscilla's alibi just evaporated into thin air. Then we look at the money. We bring in a financial expert to look at the dealership's books. Priscilla was running a massive check kiting scheme, robbing Peter to pay Paul, writing bad checks back and forth between banks to cover up a deficit of $20,000 to $30,000. She was drowning in debt. And here's the breaking point. 2 days before the murder, on Saturday, Margaret went to the bank. The bank manager said Margaret was furious. A proud moment for the family, a validation of every sacrifice they had made. They felt they had truly captured their slice of the American dream. But as the years passed, the tides of fortune began to turn. By the year 2011, the sewing business encountered severe challenges. The vital contract with Disney was lost, and the steady stream of orders dwindled to a trickle. The gentle hum of the machines grew quiet, replaced by the heavy silence of financial worry. Long and Hong, deeply traditional in their ways, felt the weight of this decline. They had spent their lives protecting their family, and the prospect of failure was a shadow they could not easily shake. In their search for comfort and a way to restore their family's prosperity, they turned to the ancient beliefs of their homeland. For thousands of years, their ancestors had believed in spiritual forces, in the balance of energy, and in the protection of benevolent guardians. When a family faced overwhelming obstacles, it was customary to seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor to lift curses and invite good fortune back into the home. Encouraged by his mother-in-law, Chow Tran began searching for someone who could help them heal their business and their hearts. In a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located in Houston, some 250 miles away. The woman, named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed a rare ability to lift heavy curses and bring positive energy to those in need. Desperate for a solution, Chow contacted her and arranged a consultation at her home in Houston. It was a journey made of hope, a search for a guiding light in a season of darkness. But none of them could have foreseen that this quest for a spiritual savior would slowly lead them into a web of greed and tragedy. Chapter 2, The Gathering Shadow. The journey to Houston was filled with quiet anticipation. Chow Tran drove down the long highway, his mind occupied by the survival of the family business. Beside him, the memory of his mother-in-law's hopeful words offered comfort. When he met Daphne Wright, he found a woman of striking presence. She was 44 years old, confident, and carried herself with an authority that suggested deep knowledge of the spiritual realm. She spoke with certainty, assuring Chow that she could easily identify the source of their bad luck and dissolve it through ancient rituals. Daphne performed her ceremonies, burning incense and reciting prayers meant to realign the family's fortunes. For a brief moment, Chow felt a sense of relief. He returned to Arlington with renewed hope, sharing the details of the meeting with Long and Hong. The family wanted so desperately to believe that their troubles were temporary, that the dark cloud over their sewing shop would soon dissipate. Yet, as the months of 2011 rolled into 212, the business did not recover. Instead, the financial burden grew heavier. Rather than questioning the effectiveness of the rituals, Chow found himself drawn deeper into Daphne's influence. He believed that perhaps the curse was stronger than they had initially realized, requiring more intensive and far more expensive spiritual interventions. Daphne, recognizing the family's desperation, began to offer her services on credit. The cost of the ceremonies, the protective charms, and the rituals began to accumulate rapidly. What started as small offerings soon ballooned into an astronomical debt. Over the course of a single year, the amount the family allegedly owed Daphne grew to somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. It was a staggering sum, one that the struggling sewing business could never hope to repay. As the debt mounted, the atmosphere within the family changed. The light-hearted laughter that once filled Long and Hong's apartment was replaced by whispered conversations and anxious glances. The elderly couple, who had always lived simply and honestly, felt trapped in a situation they did not fully understand. They had placed their trust in a spiritual guide, only to find themselves drowning in a financial abyss. Daphne's demeanor also shifted. The warm, comforting spiritual advisor began to reveal a cold and demanding nature. She wanted her money, and she was not a person who tolerated delay. She knew that Long and Hong possessed substantial life insurance policies, designed to secure the future of their children and grandchildren in the event of their passing. This knowledge sparked a dark and terrible ambition within her. If the family could not pay their debt in life, she would find a way to collect it through their deaths. Unbeknownst to the gentle elderly couple, a plan was being formed in the dark. Daphne reached out to an acquaintance named Bobby Guillory, a 52-year-old man who was struggling to survive after being laid off from his job. Desperate, hungry, and facing the prospect of homelessness, Bobby was highly vulnerable to temptation. Daphne offered him $10,000 to travel to Arlington and commit an unspeakable act. To assist him, Bobby enlisted a 16-year-old nephew, Willie Guillory, a young man who felt he had no choice but to follow his uncle's lead. Chapter 3. The Fateful Morning. The morning of June 10th, 2012, began like any other Sunday in Arlington. The air was warm and still, the sun rising slowly over quiet apartment complexes. But at 7:29 in the morning, the peace of the day was shattered when emergency dispatchers received a call from Chow Tran. His voice was laced with worry as he requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. Chow explained to the dispatcher that his teenage son had gone to the apartment to knock on the door, but there had been no answer. The family had gathered outside, growing increasingly anxious when they noticed that one of the windows was slightly open and things inside did not appear right. Too terrified to enter the residence themselves, they waited on the sidewalk, praying that their fears were groundless. Officer Weller, a dedicated member of the Arlington Police Department with 14 years of experience, was dispatched to the scene. When he arrived, he noticed a large group of family members standing outside. It was unusually early for a welfare check. and the palpable anxiety of the crowd immediately signaled to him that this was no routine call. Entering the apartment through the unlocked door, Officer Weller was immediately struck by the state of the home. The living room was in complete disarray, presenting all the classic signs of a burglary. Drawers were pulled open, compact discs were scattered across the floor, and furniture was overturned. He called out into the quiet rooms, his voice echoing off the walls, but there was no response. He systematically searched the kitchen, the bathroom, and finally entered the bedroom. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty. Officer Weller felt a momentary sense of relief. Thinking that perhaps the elderly couple had simply gone for an early morning walk to escape the summer heat, he turned to leave the room, his flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. That was when he saw them. Near a small closet, there were faint hand smudges on the wall, as if someone had reached out for support in a moment of struggle. A chill ran down the officer's spine. Every instinct told him that opening that closet door would change everything, yet his duty compelled him forward. With a hesitant hand, he pulled open the closet door. The sight that met him was one of profound tragedy. Long and Hong were inside, their lives cruelly stolen from them. They had been bound with duct tape, their faces covered to prevent them from calling for help. It was a scene of immense violence, one that left even a veteran officer like Weller in a state of shock. He walked out of the bedroom, temporarily unable to speak or use his radio, paralyzed by the sheer weight of what he had witnessed. Once he regained his composure, he called for assistance. Summoning a supervisor and the homicide unit, the peaceful Sunday had transformed into a search for answers, a quest to discover who could commit such a heartless act against two gentle elders who had never harmed a soul. Chapter 4, The Pursuit of Truth. The arrival of the Arlington homicide investigators brought a focused, determined energy to the scene. Detective Stewart, a seasoned investigator with 21 years in the department, took charge of the case. He stood in the apartment, surveying the chaos, his mind analyzing every detail. The physical evidence left behind was highly unusual. On the coffee table, a plate of crushed prescription pills lay undisturbed, alongside a partially smoked marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana wrapped neatly around a beer bottle, left in a prominent position. To the untrained eye, these items pointed directly to local gang activity. Arlington was home to several active gangs known for extortion and robbery, and the blue bandana was a color often associated with their members. However, Detective Stewart remained deeply skeptical. The crime scene felt too-staged, the clues too conveniently displayed. Most gang robberies were quick and chaotic, rarely involving such a high level of personal, targeted violence. The extensive use of duct tape and the deliberate concealment of the bodies in the closet suggested an intention that went far beyond a simple burglary gone wrong. It felt personal. The investigators began the delicate process of interviewing the grieving family. Chow Tran, as a primary English speaker, became their main point of contact. He described the previous evening, explaining that the family had gathered to celebrate Long's birthday. It had been a happy occasion, filled with laughter and love. The elderly couple had stayed until 10:30 in the evening, after which they were driven home by another family member. It was the last time they were seen alive. Chow painted a picture of a sweet, generous couple who had no enemies and lived quiet lives. He mentioned that while Vietnamese immigrants often kept cash at home due to a traditional distrust of banking institutions, his in-laws had very little money. The sewing business had been struggling, and they were facing difficult times. As the detectives continued their work, a phone call from an insurance company changed the trajectory of the investigation. The agent informed Detective Stewart that Long and Hong were covered by life insurance policies, totaling $1 million. When the detective asked who the beneficiaries were, the answer was clear. Chow Tran was among them. This revelation introduced a complex financial motive. On June 13, 2012, The detectives invited Chow to the police station for a follow-up interview. Chow was cooperative, explaining that the insurance policies were established to ensure the survival of the family, business in the event of a tragedy. He provided a detailed timeline of his whereabouts on the night of the murders, explaining that he and other family members had played cards until after 10 o'clock. His alibi was consistent, and without direct evidence, the police could not name him as a suspect. Meanwhile, the forensic laboratory processed the evidence from the apartment. They gathered deoxyribonucleic acid profiles from the marijuana cigarette and examined the duct tape for fingerprints. When the results returned, the investigators faced a major setback. The deoxyribonucleic acid did not match Chow, any family member, or any profile within the combined DNA index system database. With no immediate matches and no new leads, the momentum of the investigation began to slow. The detectives had interviewed over 50 to 60 people, including neighbors, business associates, and community members, but the killer remained in the shadows. Months turned into years, and the case of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu slowly went cold. Yet, the memory of the gentle couple remained a quiet flame, keeping the promise of justice alive in the hearts of the detectives. Chapter 5, The Catalyst. For 3 long years, the file containing the details of the Arlington tragedy sat on a shelf, quiet but never forgotten. The year was now 2015, and the world had moved on. But in the grand design of justice, the smallest events can sometimes set the largest wheels in motion. In the city of Houston, a young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for stealing a horse. In the state of Texas, horse theft is a serious felony. Because Willie had reached the age of adulthood and was now being charged with felony, the law required his biological profile to be entered into the national database. At the time of the murders in 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old with no prior felony convictions, which was why his profile had never appeared in the system. When his deoxyribonucleic acid was uploaded, the digital systems of the law performed a silent comparison. Within seconds, a match was found. The deoxyribonucleic acid on the partially smoked marijuana cigarette recovered from the Arlington crime scene belonged to Willie Guillory. On October 17, 2015, Arlington detectives traveled to locate Willie. They arrested him for a parole violation to avoid alerting him to the true nature of their interest. In the interrogation room, Willie initially denied any involvement, claiming he had never been anywhere near Arlington. But when Detective Stewart laid out the scientific reality of the biological evidence, the young man's defenses crumbled. He began to weep, the heavy burden of the secret finally breaking his resolve. He confessed to being in the apartment, but he insisted he had not acted alone. He pointed the finger at his uncle, Bobby Guillory. Willie recounted the events of June 9, 2012. His uncle had approached him, asking for help with a job in Arlington. Having grown up in a difficult environment, Willie felt he had no choice but to accompany his uncle. When they arrived, Bobby used a physical key to enter the apartment, intending to stage a robbery before the couple returned. They scattered belongings, left the pills, the beer bottle, and the blue bandana to make it look like the work of local gang members. Willie admitted to smoking the marijuana cigarette, unaware that this small act would eventually lead the police to their door. When Long and Hong returned home, the situation quickly escalated into violence. Bobby attacked the elderly man, while Willie attempted to prevent Hong from escaping. After the struggle ended, they used duct tape to secure the couple and moved them into the closet before fleeing back to Houston. When asked why they had targeted the specific couple, Willie revealed the name of the person who had orchestrated the entire plot, Daphne Wright. He explained that Daphne was a friend of his uncle's and had claimed that the couple owed her a substantial amount of money. She had told Bobby that if they did not pay, she wanted them dead, promising him $10,000 for the deed. With this explosive confession, the puzzle began to fall into place. The detectives now knew that the tragedy was not a random act of street violence, but a calculated, cold-hearted plan born of greed and manipulation. Chapter 6, Unveiling the Mastermind. The focus of the investigation now turned to Bobby Guillory. On December 16, 2015, detectives traveled to Katy, Texas, where they arrested the 52-year-old man on 2 counts of capital murder. Initially, Bobby remained silent, refusing to cooperate. But when faced with a search warrant for his own biological profile and the realization that his nephew had already confessed, his resolve dissolved. He broke down, weeping in the interrogation room, expressing fear and regret for his actions. He had no prior criminal history and had never been in trouble with the law before this tragic event. Bobby confirmed Willie's story, placing the blame entirely on Daphne Wright. He explained that he had been in a state of extreme financial desperation, having lost his job and facing the threat of life on the streets. Daphne had recognized his vulnerability and used it to her advantage, offering him $10,000 to carry out the crime. According to Bobby, Daphne operated as a spiritual loan shark. Chow, Tran, and Hong Lu had become deeply indebted to her as they tried to save their failing business. When they could no longer pay, Daphne realized she could collect her money through the life insurance policies. Bobby made a startling revelation during his confession. He claimed that Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran himself. This accusation of ultimate betrayal shocked the investigators. Chow, whom they had supported and interviewed multiple times, was now implicated as a key participant in conspiracy. On August 31st, 2016, detectives traveled to Houston to confront Daphne Wright. They found a woman who was the undisputed leader of her household, married with 3 daughters. When questioned about Chow, she confirmed he was a client, but refused to discuss their financial arrangements. Her attitude was cold and dismissive, showing no remorse or willingness to assist the police. Armed with an arrest warrant, the detectives returned to her home, placing her under arrest and conducting a thorough search of the residence. Inside, they discovered detailed ledgers that documented her business transactions. The books revealed that she regularly charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for her spiritual services, removing any doubt about the massive financial scale of her operations. Daphne's husband, Howard, was fully cooperative with the police, maintaining that he had no knowledge of his wife's dark activities. He expressed genuine shock, having believed his wife was simply offering peaceful spiritual guidance to those in need. Daphne, however, refused to speak, demanding the presence of her attorney and maintaining a stoic silence. Chapter 7, The Scales of Justice. The final piece of the complex narrative emerged when prosecutors subpoenaed Chow Tran Financial records in 2015. They discovered that following the tragic deaths of his in-laws, Chow had not reopened the sewing business. Instead, he had purchased a comfortable new home with the proceeds of the life insurance policies. Faced with the mounting evidence against him, Chow refused to speak to the police without his attorney, recognizing that they needed his testimony to secure a conviction against the mastermind. Daphne Wright. The prosecutors made a difficult decision. They offered Chow immunity from prosecution in exchange for his full cooperation and truthful testimony at trial. It was a compromise often required in the pursuit of justice, a choice to hold the primary instigator accountable. During his deposition, Chow presented a narrative of psychological control. He claimed that he and his mother-in-law had been utterly terrified of Daphne's alleged spiritual powers, believing she could place a devastating curse on their family if they did not pay. He even claimed that Hong Lu, in an act of ultimate self-sacrifice, had suggested her own death so the family could collect the insurance money to satisfy the debt. Investigators found this claim to be highly unbelievable, viewing it as an attempt to lessen his own guilt. Daphne's trial began on August 26, 2019. Chow took the stand, portraying Daphne as a relentless, greedy woman who manipulated his family and demanded their lives for money. The defense countered by pointing out that there was no physical documentation of the vast debt and suggested that Chow had orchestrated the crime entirely for his own financial gain, pocketing the $850,000 of insurance money. Despite the defense's arguments, the jury listened closely to the accumulation of evidence, including the confessions of Bobby and Willie and the physical ledgers found in Daphne's home. In September 2019, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and received the ultimate penalty of life in prison, without the possibility of parole, while Bobby and Willie also faced the consequences of their actions. The resolution of the case left a lingering sense of incompletion for the detectives. Chow Tran remained free, shielded by his immunity agreement. Yet, as the community looked back on the lives of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, they chose to remember the warmth, the dedication, and the beautiful dreams they had brought from Vietnam. The story of their journey was a reminder of the strength of love, the dangers of blind trust, and the enduring pursuit of truth that eventually brought the shadows into the light. The morning sun over Arlington, Texas, usually brings with it a warm, golden promise, the kind of light that stretches across the wide concrete avenues and bathes the suburban neighborhoods in a quiet, domestic peace. In the early years of the new millennium, this corner of Tarrant County had become a sanctuary for families seeking a fresh start, a place where different cultures woven together created a vibrant, colorful tapestry of shared hopes. Among those who had traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean to build a new life were Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lee. They had arrived in the United States in the year 2000, bringing with them not only their 3 children, but also a deep treasury of time-honored traditions, an unwavering work ethic, and a love that had weathered decades of change. Long was a man of quiet dignity, whose face bore the gentle lines of a lifetime of hard work and laughter, while Hong was the warm, beating heart of their household, a woman whose culinary skills and nurturing presence made their home a central gathering place for the local Vietnamese community. Together, they represented the resilient spirit of the post-1975 immigrant generation, those who had left behind the familiar landscapes of their homeland to cultivate a legacy for their children and grandchildren in a land of unfamiliar customs and languages. For more than a decade, they poured their energy into building a commercial sewing business, a venture that began as a modest operation in their garage, but quickly grew into a thriving enterprise. To navigate the complexities of American business transactions, they relied heavily on their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant who possessed a strong command of the English language. Chow was the public face of the business, the one who negotiated contracts, shook hands with suppliers, and acted as the bridge between the traditional world of his in-laws and the fast-paced commercial environment of Texas. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the family reached the pinnacle of their entrepreneurial journey when they secured a highly lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a global entertainment giant, a commercial giant whose name was recognized by children and families across the world. For a time, it seemed that their version of the American dream had been fully realized. Their home was filled with the sounds of their grandchildren playing, the hum of sewing machines, and the comforting aroma of traditional Vietnamese broth simmering on the stove. Yet, as is often the case with the unpredictable tides of commerce, this period of abundance was not to last. By the year 2011, the sewing business suffered a devastating blow when the massive contract was discontinued. Almost overnight, the steady flow of orders dwindled to a trickle, and the family found themselves facing severe financial distress. The machines that had once hummed with productive energy fell silent, and a heavy cloud of anxiety settled over the household. Long and Hong, deeply rooted in the traditional spiritual practices of their ancestors, believed that this sudden string of misfortune was not merely a consequence of shifting market dynamics, but rather the result of a spiritual imbalance, a curse that had settled upon their endeavors. In many East Asian traditions, when a family encounters a series of insurmountable obstacles, such as impending bankruptcy, severe health crises, or marital discord, it is common to seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor. These advisors are believed to possess the unique ability to communicate with the spiritual realm, perform cleansing rituals, and invite the protective blessings of the lucky deities and the gods of wealth, desperate to find a solution and restore harmony to their family. Hong and Chow began searching through the local Vietnamese language newspapers, hoping to find someone who could help them lift the perceived curse. Their search led them to an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located in Houston, approximately 250 miles to the south. The woman, who went by the name of Daphne Wright, advertised a wide range of metaphysical services, claiming she could remove malevolent curses, bestow powerful blessings of good fortune, and help struggling businesses regain their prosperity. For a family standing on the precipice of financial ruin, Daphne's promises shone like a beacon of hope. Encouraged by his mother-in-law, Chow made the drive to Houston to consult with the spiritual practitioner, embarking on a path that would ultimately lead the family into a dark web of manipulation and greed. At first, the rituals seemed to offer a sense of comfort. Daphne performed ceremonies intended to cleanse the family's business of negative energy. And for a brief period, Long and Hong felt a renewed sense of optimism. They believed that their spiritual savior would guide them back to the prosperous path they had worked so hard to establish. However, as the months passed, the promised financial recovery failed to materialize. Instead of advising the family to adjust their business strategies, Daphne maintained that the curse was exceptionally stubborn, requiring increasingly elaborate and expensive rituals to dismantle. Deeply ensnared by their beliefs and terrified of the spiritual consequences of stopping the ceremonies, the family continued to pour their remaining resources into Daphne's services. Because they did not have the cash readily available, Daphne began extending them credit, allowing the debt to accumulate. Over the course of a year, the financial obligation ballooned to an astronomical sum, somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. What had begun as a quest for spiritual healing had transformed into a crushing financial prison, with Daphne acting as a spiritual loan shark who demanded absolute compliance and prompt payment. The tension reached a devastating climax on the morning of June 10, 2012. At 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers in Arlington received a frantic call from Chow Tran. He explained that he and his family had been trying to contact his elderly in-laws, 70-something Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, but had received no response. Worried by the silence, Chow had sent his teenage son to knock on the apartment door, but the knock went unanswered. The family gathered outside the residence, their concern deepening when they noticed that one of the apartment windows was unusually open. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, but too frightened to enter the home themselves, they waited anxiously on the sidewalk for the police to arrive. Officer Weller, a dedicated member of the Arlington police force, was the first to respond to the welfare check. As she pulled up to the apartment complex, she immediately sensed that this was not a routine call. It was exceptionally early in the morning for a welfare check, and the sight of an entire multi-generational family standing outside in a state of visible distress suggested a situation of gravity. Officer Weller entered the apartment, calling out the names of the elderly couple, but her voice echoed through the quiet rooms without response. The interior of the home was in complete disarray, displaying all the classic signs of burglary. Drawers had been pulled open, personal belongings were scattered across the floor, and a collection of compact discs had been ransacked. As Officer Weller searched the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom, she found no sign of the occupants. She proceeded to the master bedroom, shining her flashlight into the darkened corners. Initially, she saw nothing out of the ordinary that would suggest the couple was still inside. and she began to hope that perhaps they had simply gone for an early morning walk to enjoy the cool air before the Texas heat set in. However, as she turned to leave the bedroom, her flashlight caught a series of faint hand smudges on the wall adjacent to a remarkably small closet. A sudden, instinctual hesitation washed over her, an internal voice warning her of the tragedy that lay beyond the thin wooden door. Recognizing her duty to leave no stone unturned, she reached out and pulled the closet door open. Inside the cramped space lay the bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. They had been bound hand and foot, hogtied with heavy silver duct tape. Their heads and mouths were completely enveloped in layers of the thick adhesive, and the small closet was stained with the unmistakable signs of a violent struggle. Officer Weller, despite her 14 years of experience on the force, was struck with profound sense of shock. The sheer brutality of the scene left her momentarily unable to speak or even use her radio to call for assistance. She stepped back into the living room, gathering her composure in the quiet space, before finally contacting her supervisor and requesting the dispatch of the crime scene unit and the homicide investigators. When Detective Stewart and the veteran homicide team arrived, they were met with a crime scene that was both heartbreaking and perplexing. The physical evidence suggested that the elderly couple had been confronted the moment they stepped through their front door. There were traces of blood on the entryway carpet, on the couch, on the coffee table, and along the walls leading toward the back bedroom, indicating that they had desperately tried to cling to the walls as they were being forced into the rear of the apartment. On the coffee table, investigators found a plate containing crushed prescription pills, prepared in a manner that suggested recreational consumption, alongside a partially smoked marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana wrapped tightly around a glass beer bottle, left in a prominent position as if it were a deliberate calling card. To the initial observer, these items strongly pointed to the involvement of local street gangs, some of whom were known to operate in the region and occasionally extort local business owners. Yet, as the seasoned investigators began to analyze the scene, a sense of skepticism began to take root. The presentation of the gang markers seemed almost too perfect, too stage-managed to be the work of impulsive street criminals. While street gangs certainly engaged in robberies, the extreme level of personalized violence inflicted upon an elderly couple who had no known enemies or illicit associations seemed inconsistent with a simple robbery gone wrong. The detectives began to hypothesize that the crime scene had been deliberately staged to mislead the police and divert attention away from the true perpetrators. The following day, detectives attended the autopsies of the victims at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office. The medical examiner confirmed that both Long and Hong had suffered significant blunt force trauma to their heads, likely inflicted with an instrument resembling a hammer or a small bat. However, the physical trauma was not the primary cause of their deaths. The autopsy revealed a far more agonizing reality. Hong's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of duct tape, and Long's face had been bound with 10 feet of the same material. They had died of suffocation. The revelation of this slow, painful end deepened the determination of the detectives to bring those responsible to justice. As the team returned to the police station to coordinate their next steps, Detective Stewart received an unexpected telephone call from a life insurance company. The representative informed the detective that the deceased couple was covered under a highly substantial life insurance policy valued at approximately $1 million. When Detective Stewart inquired about the designated beneficiaries of this policy, the answer sent the investigation in an entirely new direction. One of the primary beneficiaries was their son-in-law, Chow Tran. Hoping to clarify this financial development, investigators invited Chow to the police station for a follow-up interview on June 13, 2012. Chow cooperated fully, presenting himself as a grieving relative eager to assist the police. When questioned about the insurance policy, he explained that because the sewing business was registered in his in-laws' names, The family had established a policy to ensure the business could continue to support the extended family in the event of a tragedy. He also provided a detailed, consistent timeline of his activities on the night of the murders, explaining that the entire family had gathered to celebrate Long's birthday, playing cards and sharing a meal until past 10 o'clock in the evening. Chow's alibi was supported by other family members, and the detectives found no immediate physical evidence to connect him to the physical acts of violence. To ensure a thorough investigation, the crime scene technicians processed the biological evidence collected from the apartment, including the forensic profiles from a marijuana cigarette found on the coffee table. The resulting deoxyribonucleic acid profile was submitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's combined DNA index system, but the search yielded no matches. Because the database primarily contains profiles of individuals with prior felony convictions, the lack of a match suggested that the person who left the cigarette might have been a minor or someone who had never been arrested for a serious offense. With no viable leads, no matching fingerprints, and an entire family possessing consistent alibis, the investigation slowly ground to a halt. For more than 2 years, the file sat on the detectives' desks, a somber reminder of an unsolved tragedy. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in October of the year 2015, more than 3 years after the fateful night in Arlington. The police department received notification that a newly entered deoxyribonucleic acid profile in the national database had produced a perfect match to the biological material recovered from the marijuana cigarette. The profile belonged to Willie Guillory, a young man who had recently been convicted of a felony involving the theft of a horse in Houston. At the time of the murders in 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old, which explained why his profile had not been present in the database during the initial investigation. Now an adult with a felony record, his identity was finally revealed to the law enforcement community. On October 17, 2015, investigators located Willie Guillory and brought him in for questioning. Initially, Willie denied any knowledge of the events in Arlington, claiming he had never visited the city and suggesting that perhaps his biological material had been somehow transferred without his knowledge. However, when the detectives presented him with the undeniable scientific accuracy of the deoxyribonucleic acid match, the young man's defenses crumbled. He broke down in tears and confessed to his role in the crime, insisting that he had not acted alone. Willie explained that in the summer of 2012, he had been living under the care of his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. According to Willie, his uncle had instructed him to join him on a trip to Arlington to assist with a task, promising that they would be compensated for their help. On June 9, 2012, the uncle and nephew made the 3-hour drive from Houston to Arlington. Willie claimed that Bobby had been provided with a key to the elderly couple's apartment, allowing them to enter the residence without forcing the lock. Once inside, Bobby instructed Willie to scatter items around the living room, open drawers, and leave the gang-related items, including the blue bandana, the crush pills, and the beer bottle, to create the illusion of a street gang robbery. During this process, Willie had smoked a portion of a marijuana cigarette, inadvertently leaving behind the crucial piece of evidence that would eventually identify him. When Long and Hong returned home, the situation turned violent. Bobby confronted the couple, using a blunt object to incapacitate them, while Willie assisted in preventing their escape. Together, they bound the victims with duct tape, moved them into the small bedroom closet, and returned to Houston. When asked why they had targeted an elderly couple they did not even know, Willie revealed that the entire operation had been organized and funded by a prominent acquaintance of his uncle, a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright. Willie stated that he had witnessed his uncle meeting with Daphne in her office, where she complained about clients who owed her a substantial amount of money, and declared that if they did not pay, she wanted them dead. Armed with this critical confession, the investigators secured arrest warrants for Bobby Guillory. On December 16, 2015, detectives traveled to Katy, Texas, where they apprehended Bobby on 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with the reality of his arrest and the confession of his nephew, Bobby also chose to cooperate, confirming that Daphne Wright had orchestrated the entire plot. He explained that in 2011, he had been struggling with severe financial difficulties after being laid off from his job. Daphne, aware of his desperation, had offered him $10,000 to travel to Arlington and carry out the deed. Bobby painted a portrait of Daphne as an incredibly calculating individual who operated her spiritual practice with the ruthless efficiency of an organized enterprise. According to Bobby, Chow Tran and Hong Lee had accumulated a massive debt to Daphne for her services, and when they were unable to pay, Daphne proposed a solution centered on the couple's life insurance policies. She suggested that by removing the elderly couple, Chow and his wife would receive a significant financial windfall, which would then be used to settle the outstanding spiritual debt. Most shockingly, Bobby claimed that Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran himself. In August of the year 2016, detectives executed a search warrant at Daphne Wright's Houston residence and placed her under arrest inside her home. Investigators discovered detailed ledger books documenting her extensive business transactions. The records revealed that she had been charging clients tens of thousands of dollars for various spiritual services, confirming the immense financial scale of her operations. While Daphne maintained her innocence and refused to provide statements without her attorney, the combined testimonies of Willie and Bobby Guillory, along with the financial ledgers and the scientific evidence, provided a powerful foundation for the prosecution. To secure a conviction against the primary organizer of the crime, prosecutors made the difficult decision to offer Chow Tran immunity from prosecution in exchange for his complete and honest testimony. Chow agreed to the arrangement, and during Daphne's trial in August of the year 2019, he took the stand to describe the immense psychological control she had exerted over his family. He portrayed her as an imposing, greedy figure who used their deeply held traditional beliefs to manipulate them, ultimately demanding their compliance under the threat of spiritual and physical ruin. The defense team vigorously challenged Chow's credibility, arguing that he had used a spiritual advisor as a scapegoat to secure the life insurance proceeds for himself without facing legal consequences. However, after hearing all the evidence, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a definitive end to her manipulative reign. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced the legal consequences of their actions, ensuring that those who had participated in the tragedy were held accountable. While the legal proceedings left some questions unanswered and brought a mixture of emotions to the surviving family members, the resolution of the case stands as a testament to the dedication of the investigators who refused to let the memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee fade into obscurity. The story of their journey, their devotion to their family, and the ultimate triumph of justice serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring importance of community, truth, and protective embrace of the law. The sun always seemed to rise with gentle, golden promise over flat, sprawling landscapes of north-central Texas. In the city of Arlington, a place where the hum of modern industry met the quiet warmth of tight-knit neighborhoods, the mornings were usually filled with the comforting sounds of early traffic, the chirping of birds in the oak trees, and the smell of fresh coffee brewing in suburban kitchens. It was a city of diverse faces, a tapestry of cultures woven together by families who had traveled from all corners of the world to find their own piece of the American dream. Among these families were Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lu. They had arrived in the United States in the year 2000, leaving behind the familiar, bustling streets of their homeland in Vietnam. For decades, they had known the rhythm of a different life, one shaped by ancient traditions, close community ties, and the quiet resilience that comes from surviving times of great change. When they made the decision to pack up their lives and move to Texas with their 3 children, they were not looking for grand fortunes. Instead, they sought a peaceful sanctuary where their children and grandchildren could grow, learn, and thrive under the wide, open skies of a new land. In Arlington, they found a thriving Vietnamese community, a place where the old ways and the new world lived in a beautiful, harmonious balance. The first major wave of immigrants had arrived in the area after the year 1975, and over the decades, they had built a vibrant network of businesses, temples, and neighborhoods. Long and Hong studied the area carefully. They saw a place of opportunity, a welcoming city where hard work was rewarded and where they could establish a legacy. With determination and a shared work ethic, the elderly couple started a commercial sewing business. It was a modest operation at first, run out of a small workspace filled with the rhythmic hum of sewing machines, the colorful mounds of fabrics, and the soft chatter of family members working side by side. To help manage the business, they enlisted the support of their son-in-law, Chow Tran. Chow was young, energetic, and spoke the best English in the family, making him the natural public face of the enterprise. He handled the contracts, spoke with the suppliers, and navigated the complex world of American business regulations, while Long and Hong focused on a craft they knew best, ensuring every garment was stitched with perfection. For nearly a decade, their efforts bore fruit. The business expanded, and their reputation for quality craftsmanship grew. The pinnacle of their success came when they secured a highly lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a global entertainment giant, producing clothing that would bear the iconic designs of Disney. It was a proud moment for the family, a validation of all the sacrifices they had made when crossing the ocean. They were living the dream they had envisioned, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the respect of their peers. But life, like the Texas weather, can be unpredictable. By the year 2011, the economic tides began to turn. The coveted contract with the entertainment giant was lost, and almost overnight, the steady flow of orders dwindled to a trickle. The sewing machines grew quiet, and the heavy silence of financial anxiety settled over the family. The bills began to accumulate, and the pressure of maintaining the business started to take a heavy toll on everyone, especially on Hong and her son-in-law, Chow. In moments of deep distress, people often look to their roots for guidance and comfort. For generations, their ancestors have believed in the spiritual forces that govern luck, prosperity, and protection. In the traditional culture of their homeland, when a household faced a sudden string of bad luck or impending ruin, it was common to believe that a spiritual imbalance or even a curse was at play. To remedy this, families would seek the counsel of a spiritual advisor, a person believed to possess the rare ability to communicate with the unseen world, perform ancient rituals, and lift a heavy hand of misfortune. Anxious to save the family business and find a way out of the darkening financial shadow, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law began searching through the local Vietnamese newspapers, looking for someone who could offer a spiritual solution. It was there, among the advertisements of local merchants and community services, that they found a notice for a spiritual advisor located in Houston, some 250 miles away. The woman advertised herself as a powerful healer, someone who could remove the most stubborn of bad curses, bestow good fortune, and restore peace to troubled households. With a heart full of hope, Chow reached out to the advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright. She agreed to meet him at her home in Houston for a consultation. The family believed that this meeting would be the turning point, the moment their luck would finally change and the sewing machines would hum with busy productivity. Once again, Daphne performed her rituals, burning incense and reciting prayers designed to ward off the negative energies that had plagued the business. For a brief period, Chow and Hong felt a sense of relief, confident that their spiritual savior would guide them back to prosperity. Yet, behind the facade of spiritual healing, a much darker reality was beginning to unfold. The rituals were not free, And Daphne Wright was not a simple, benevolent healer. As the months passed and the business failed to recover, Daphne began to charge exorbitant fees for her services. She ran her operations on a system of spiritual credit, convincing the desperate family that more complex, intensive rituals were required to fully break the curse. The debt grew rapidly, ballooning to a staggering sum between $250,000 and $280,000. The family was trapped in a cycle of desperation, pouring what little money they had left into the rituals, terrified of what might happen if they stopped. Daphne was a master of psychological control, making it clear that those who failed to pay her would face dire spiritual consequences. The pressure was building to a breaking point, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock the entire city of Arlington. On the morning of the 10th of June, the year 2012, the quiet of the early hours was broken when emergency dispatchers received a call at 7:29. The caller was Chow Tran, his voice trembling with anxiety as he requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. He explained that his teenage son had gone to knock on their apartment door, but there had been no answer. The family had gathered outside, growing increasingly worried when they noticed that one of the apartment windows was open and things inside did not look right. When the responding police officers arrived at the apartment complex, they found the family waiting outside, too terrified to enter the home themselves. Officer Weller, a veteran officer with 14 years of experience, was the first to step through the front door. The interior of the apartment was in complete disarray, bearing all the hallmarks of a burglary. Drawers were pulled out, belongings were scattered across the floor, and a heavy, unsettling silence hung in the air. Officer Weller moved cautiously through the rooms, calling out for Long and Hong, but there was no response. After checking the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom, he entered the bedroom. At first glance, the room appeared empty. He turned to leave, but as his flashlight swept across the wall, he noticed dark hand smudges next to a small closet door. A sense of apprehension washed over him, a deep instinct telling him that something terrible lay behind that door. Taking a deep breath, Officer Weller opened the closet. Inside, he made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu were inside the small space, their bodies bound tightly with duct tape. Their heads and mouths were heavily wrapped, and there was no sign of life. In that silent, tragic moment, the officer knew that their journey to find the American dream had ended in an unspeakable nightmare. The news of the double homicide sent shockwaves through the Arlington Police Department. Homicide investigators, including seasoned detectives with over 2 decades of experience, arrived to process the scene. It was a highly violent and chaotic environment. The physical evidence suggested that an attack had occurred the moment the elderly couple had walked through their front door, with signs of a struggle near the entrance, on the carpet, and against the furniture. As the forensic teams began their meticulous work, they uncovered several items that seemed designed to paint a specific picture. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills, and nearby was a partially smoked marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana wrapped carefully around a beer bottle left in plain sight. To the investigators, this bandana looked almost like a calling card, pointing directly toward the active street gangs known to operate in the region. However, the detectives remained skeptical. In their years of investigating major crimes, they had learned that when a crime scene appears too perfect, too staged, it often means the perpetrator is trying to direct attention away from the truth. The level of violence and the specific nature of the crime felt deeply personal, far exceeding the typical patterns of a standard robbery. They collected every piece of potential evidence, including the marijuana cigarette, hair fibers, and swabs of the duct tape, hoping that science would eventually provide the answers. In the days following the tragedy, the detectives focused on interviewing the family members to understand who might have wanted to harm the gentle, hard-working couple. Chow Tran served as a primary spokesperson, cooperating fully and providing an airtight alibi for himself and the rest of the family. He explained that on the night of the incident, they had all been celebrating Long's birthday at a family gathering, playing cards until late in the evening before the elderly couple was driven home by another relative. As the investigation progressed, detectives received a routine call from an insurance company that instantly shifted the direction of their inquiries. It revealed that Long and Hong had been covered by substantial life insurance policies, totaling at least $1 million, with Chow Tran named as one of the primary beneficiaries. When questioned about this, Chow explained that the policies were intended to ensure the survival of the family business in the event of a tragedy, but the revelation added a complex layer of financial motive to the case. Despite their best efforts, the initial leads began to dry up. The DNA extracted from the marijuana cigarette did not match any of the family members, nor did it return a match in the national database, suggesting the contributor might be someone without a prior felony record, perhaps even a minor. For more than 2 years, the files remained on the detectives' desks, the trail growing colder with each passing month, until a surprising turn of events in the year 2015 brought the case back to life. In the autumn of 2015, the database returned a positive match for the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette. The profile belonged to Willie Guillory, a young man who had recently been convicted of a felony involving the theft of a horse in Houston. Because Willie had been only 16 years old at the time of the murders in 2012 with no prior record, his DNA had not been in the system. His recent conviction as an adult had finally connected him to the crime scene in Arlington. Detectives wasted no time in bringing Willie in for questioning. When presented with the scientific evidence placing him inside the apartment, the young man broke down and confessed, revealing that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 49-year-old man who had been struggling financially after being laid off from his job. Bobby was arrested shortly thereafter at his home in Katy, Texas. Faced with the gravity of the charges, Bobby also confessed, detailing how they had been hired to commit the crime by Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. Bobby explained that Daphne was determined to collect the money she believed she was owed, and she had devised a plan to eliminate the couple so that the insurance policies could be cashed in to settle the massive spiritual debt. The revelation of this intricate, tragic